The Institute for Divorce Financial Analysts, IDFA, is a proud sponsor of Purse Strings. IDFA is the premier organization dedicated to the certification, education, and promotion of the use of financial professionals in the divorce arena. IDFA provides specialized training to accounting, financial, and legal professionals in the field of pre-divorce financial planning. To find out more about earning the Certified Divorce Financial Analyst designation, visit institutedfa.com.
Thank you, fearless listeners, and go you for hitting play. Please like and subscribe as it helps us grow. Also, share this with a friend as we have to keep talking about this shit. Now let's dive in. Coming up on today's edition of Women in Money, the shit we don't talk about, our guest is Meg McKeen. Meg is leading an amazing and kind of different life. We wanted to have her share her story living as a digital nomad in the midst and the thoughtful travel adventure. We want to dig into the decisions she's made to live a very freeing and unencumbered life, and to talk about all the planning she has to do on the regular. Yes, and Meg is also founder of Adjunct Advisors. She's been a financial expert in the industry with over 20 years of experience focusing on insurance. Yes, but that's only part. She's got a whole lot more. Yes, so let's get into it.
Gloria Steinem once said, "We will never solve the feminization of power until we solve the masculinity of wealth." Barbara Provost and Maggie Nielsen are the team at Purse Strings that will help you navigate the ins and outs of financial independence so that you can be financially fearless. This is Women in Money, the shit we don't talk about.
So Meg, we met, gosh, how many years ago has it been now? 5?
Well, the business will be 5 this summer. So it's gotta be that long. Yeah.
Yeah. So in the city of Chicago on a very rainy day, I ran down the street and you were working out of a work place, and we met for coffee, and your hair was short and a whole different color. And you told me about this venture around starting your own business and kind of some changes. I didn't know you. I just met you, and things that were going on with your life. And I told you a bit about Purse Strings. And ever since then, we've kind of always checked in with each other and met up when we could and talked to each other via social media or LinkedIn. And I've always been fascinated by you and your life and what you've done. And so I'm thrilled today to have you be a guest on our podcast. And I'd love for you to introduce yourself and share with our audience a little bit about your background.
I will do that. I will do that in just a second. But first, I have to say thank you, a sincere, heartfelt thank you for taking that call all those years ago and making time for me, and for being one of the very first people and women who I deeply admired, who didn't tell me that my ideas were harebrained and guaranteed to fail. And so that early belief in me was really, I didn't really realize then how critical it was for me to keep moving and to keep going and growing. But thank you for that. And for all the conversations we've had since then. Big fan. And Maggie, it's great to meet you in this way. And what an inspiration to see a mother-daughter team building something so special. And it's got me in my feelings right now about my own relationship with my mom and how just wonderful and supportive she's been my whole life. So really cool moment to be here with you and sharing a little bit more about my story. We'll talk about the professional first. And I'm suspecting a lot of those listening will be able to relate. Much of my upbringing was very traditional in the sense that I went to, had a good education, came from a good, strong family unit, went to college, got a degree, and got a job, which was the rules at the time. You get an education and you get a job and you start making some money and be a functioning part of, contributing part of society. And I did that. And I did that for a long time, candidly. And I worked as an intern in insurance in the college and stayed in the industry. And I'm still in the industry today, though my perspective has changed in a big way since then. But at the same time that I was navigating my career, I was also navigating some changes in my personal life. So got married quite young, right out of college, and was married for about 8 years and divorced when I was 30. And so really think often and vocally about how important it is to acknowledge that we're living our personal lives while we're living our careers at the same time. And they're happening simultaneously. And sometimes our careers are the most important thing. And other times our personal relationships, whether it's a partner or a spouse, or maybe a child or a parent who needs something extra from us in those moments, that we're constantly doing this dance as women of what's front and center and what's in the back seat. And certainly I've experienced that in my life. 6 years ago, I found myself not partnered, a one-woman show in every sense of the word, but feeling very misaligned in terms of the work I was doing, the clients that I was supporting in the insurance industry, the environment that I found myself showing up in every day. And it wasn't that I worked for a terrible boss or a horrible company. It was actually the opposite. I felt like I had everything I was supposed to want, rewinding back to that master plan that one has when you're 21 and don't know any better. And so I was living that, but feeling like it took me way too long to get out of the car in the morning to go into the office. And there wasn't anything I could do to muster up the excitement and the enthusiasm for the work that I was doing, even though I was paid well, and even though I had respect, and even though I had opportunities. I felt this major misalignment. And so I took a year off. And that's a very radical thing to do, except for the fact that I was single, had no children, was living very much within my means, and could really financially afford to take a step back and evaluate what was next. And that's exactly what I did. I turned 6 months into a year because of the famous B word, budgeting. I really learned how to stretch the money that I had saved leading up to that point in order to make that a year, because frankly, at 6 months, I still didn't know what I wanted to do next. That had not appeared to me yet. I thought about leaving the insurance industry altogether and starting at ground zero in a totally different industry, entry level, $30,000 a year if I was lucky. And then a very thoughtful mentor of mine, who I deeply respected then and still, kind of tapped me on the shoulder and said, what if you didn't run from it, but what if you ran towards it with a different way of thinking? And so that's what I did. 5 years ago, I started Adjunct Advisors, and it's a project-based consultancy serving the insurance industry, and a little teeny bit of it that I do outside of the insurance industry. But the business that I've created has really allowed me to find that alignment that I was missing, which is not necessarily about people and power and success, but it's success on my terms, and also flexibility, but also being able to work my values, to be able to work with clients who see me for who I am, who compensate me for what I'm worth to them and to their organization, and for the outcomes that I produce. And every day I get to wake up and work this business, and I'm worry when scarcity hits that I'm going to lose it all tomorrow, and this is just going to be a moment in time. But 5 years later, those days are much, fewer and further between, and I'm onto something pretty great. So it's very cool to be able to be here with you all 5 years later and kind of capture this moment in time.
I love that you made that decision to really find out what it is that was going to make you feel happy and valued, and, ways that were meaningful for you to spend your time. So that's wonderful. But in those 5 years, part of those 5 years, you were living in Chicago.
Yep.
And I know you made some big decisions to leave Chicago and kind of live what you call a digital nomad life. So tell us how you came to that decision and how you kind of launched that strategy for yourself.
Yeah. So I was just sharing with both of you before we started recording. These aren't stories I get to tell very often. And so it's fun when you're so in your business or in your day-to-day, it's fun to take the 10,000 foot view and really think about this, because I don't do it very often. But for context, so I mentioned I was married and divorced. After my divorce, quite a while ago, it was about 15 years ago. I was living in the southwest suburbs of Chicago with my ex-husband. We sold our home there, and I kind of started scratching my head and looking around and saying, what do I do now? Most of my girlfriends had done their 20s in Chicago, in the city of Chicago, and now we're in the suburbs raising families. And I was kind of doing it in reverse. I'd done the family chapter, though I don't have children, but had lived that part of my story. And now at 30, it was like, where do I go? And so a friend introduced me to another friend who had a place for rent in a lovely neighborhood on the north side of Chicago. And so I ended up there and I stayed there for 10 years, moved once in that process. But the thing about 10 years anywhere is that if you blink, it goes by really quickly. But if you choose to really pause and reflect, I realized that it would go really quickly if I didn't make some changes, that I would wake up and it would be 10 more years and I would probably be in that same place. And though there's nothing wrong with that, again, fortunate, good friends, good network, good community, good support. Chicago had changed a lot, but I had changed a lot. And Chicago for me had been this beautiful, soft place to land, this warm hug after my divorce that sort of took me in and helped me heal. But I wasn't that woman anymore. I had built a business, and then this thing called a pandemic set in, and I started looking around saying, what am I doing here? Whose life am I living at this point? But I didn't know where I wanted to go. I knew I was ready to move on, but I didn't know where I was going to move to. Nothing was appearing as sort of that right next step for me. And so I made the decision to, after a lot of, and, we're talking about planning, so maybe I'll dig in a little to this, but, you're faced with, I'm ready to make a change. And now you've got to back into the logistics of that. Do I keep my place and rent it out? Do I sell it outright? Do I rent something right away? Do I crash with friends? What do I do? What combination of those things? And I decided my condo was an asset. It had appreciated since I had bought it 10 years prior. And so I decided that selling it made more sense for me. Also, I loved being a homeowner when I was partnered. I didn't always love being a homeowner as a single woman. It was a smart financial decision for me when I did it. And it was a smart financial decision for me when I sold it. So the condo association was self-managed. We had money, but we didn't have a plethora of money. And so as a small business owner, I was feeling a pressure that every time a neighbor had a complaint or every time something needed to be repaired, I was going to have to start ponying up for those things. And that created some financial uncertainty for me that I knew that I could reconcile if I liquidated that asset, if you will. And so that's what I did. Then came the stuff. Like I have this condo full of stuff. And I loved acquiring things. I had a beautiful home and all the creature comforts that one could want. But when it came right down to it, I had to make the decision, do I put it all in storage? And then potentially in a year or 2 or 5 or 10, come back to a storage unit, scratching my head and wondering, what did I keep this stuff for? Or did I sell it? And I decided option B. I ended up basically donating or selling the vast majority of my things. I have a couple things still in my parents' basement in Michigan. Every once in a while I go back. I just did this a couple weeks ago and I look at what's there and I'm like, what am I keeping this stuff for? Because the truth is, to get this, to kind of get out of the nuts and bolts here and back to the bigger picture, even 2 years ago, it's almost 2.5 that I started traveling this way. I'm not the same person.
Right.
My relationship with stuff, physical things, has changed dramatically. My relationship to the acquisition of things and having things and material possessions has changed. And so I'm really glad I made the decision to purge instead of keep, because there would have been a financial implication to pay for storage. And then the likelihood that whenever the time comes that I'm ready to, air quote, settle down again, those are not the things that I'm going to want to have.
Right.
So
I'm so impressed by how much you're able to really take a step back and kind of slow down and be like, nothing's terribly wrong here. I have a great job or a great situation or things like that, but it just still doesn't feel right. And you still took that leap of faith, because a lot of people, they're like, well, what's not broken, we don't need a fix, but it's not totally fixed, And so you really went to go find what was going to make you happy, which is so impressive, to even just take that moment and take that step back and be like, all right, I was here for 10 years, 10 more can fly by, no problem. What do I want to do? Which a lot of people don't do. So it's nice to see and to really have that trust in yourself, even though I'm sure there are multiple scary days of not knowing what you were going to do.
Yeah. And I always want to, well, thank you. And thank you for the compliment that you paid. And I want to acknowledge that. And I also want to acknowledge there are a lot of reasons why we stay where we are, right? Again, no partner no huge mortgage, no mountains of college debt, no kids to put through like lots of reasons in the pro column for me and lots of reasons in the con column for others. And so I don't want to take for granted. This is a moment in time. My situation could change in any number of ways that would change my course. And I understand that. And I respect that the choice that I'm making for me is not the choice that others can make or would choose to make. But again, in this kind of thread of planning that we're talking about, one of the things I really realized along the way is that I was living my life in 10-year increments. I was always thinking 10 years into the future. I think when my ex-husband and I were married and we were buying a car, choosing a car, and we bought the SUV with the third row seat that could eventually provide more space for the kids we never ended up having. And there were so many examples, and not just when I was partnered, but again, as a single person, where I was always thinking long-term out into the future, which is a good thing, generally speaking. But sometimes when you're so focused on the future, you miss the present. And it's so obvious and it's so easy to say, but the biggest takeaway, if I had to sum up all the learning I've done in the last 2.5 years, it's that I can be happy anywhere, period. And the stuff and the location and the things that are around me and even the people, I love my alone time. I love being by myself. I love being the captain of my ship. I love being a one-woman show. And wherever that's happening, whether it's here in the United States, in Oklahoma or Omaha or Seattle or Maine, any of the amazing places I've been, it's that acknowledgement and that understanding that has just been the biggest gift to me. Because I think a lot of us are chasing something.
Yeah.
We're always thinking there's a better, there's a next, there's another something out there for us. And to be able to be present in this moment and to look around and have all my essential needs met and to be really squeezing as much as I can out of life right now is it's a really powerful lesson that I've learned.
Oh, that's awesome. And I want to know, Meg, when you sold your condo and they handed you the keys to somebody else and you all of a sudden were homeless with all intents and purposes.
Yeah, still. And I still am. Yeah.
Yeah. What was your plan? Like you signed your documents, you left the place, and where was your stuff and what was your plan? What was your next move for the next day or the next week or next 6 months? How did you go about planning everything?
Yeah. So, oh gosh, where do we begin? The best thing that happened in all of this was my place went under contract and the buyer wanted a long closing. And so I had time. I was blessed with the gift of time to figure all of this out. And once I knew kind of the date that I needed to be out by, I kind of backed into it. And so I started to think about all the stuff and what could I sell on Facebook Marketplace and what could I just donate? And it was dozens of trips to Goodwill and really intended to only leave with what would fit in the trunk of my car. And so that became the litmus test. Is this valuable enough to me sentimentally or financially to keep it that I want to travel with it? And again, I do have a few things in my parents' basement. So I'm not a total, I do have a heart. I'm not a total heartless, unsentimental, but the yearbooks went in the dumpster, the love letters from ex-boyfriends gone, all the notes I passed to my girlfriends in high school gone, all of that stuff that I hadn't looked to I hadn't looked at the boxes in decades, no joke. I made the decision that the space I was creating in my life to live my life was worth more than hanging on to that stuff that had really not provided much for me. And also took a lot of pictures of stuff, which is a great way that we can remember things without physically hanging on to them. In terms of the logistics, I knew, moving is stressful, whether you're moving across town or it's a different energy. It's stressful. And I was feeling that in that season. And I knew that I wanted to spend 30 days kind of out in the wilderness by myself. I just wanted to heal and recover a little bit from that process. So I ended up going to...
Maggie is just eating this up. Look at the glow on her face. She's like, I wish I could be Meg.
To me, I'd be like, I'd really want to do that. I don't know if I would. I'd be like a single female alone in the woods. I don't know, but I just know like Barb's over here. Like never would I ever spend more than 12 hours in the woods. Like
Yeah.
not even that much. So
Well, first of all, I'd be eaten by the mosquitoes and I'd die. So
Well, and let me talk you both down. I didn't actually go to the woods. However, I rented an old farmhouse in a rural part of Maine. And, mind you, it was February, late February, March when this all went down. And so it was very cold. It was very isolated, but it was perfect. And I really burrowed in and hunkered down and caught up with myself, read some great books, obviously was working this whole time, still continuing to manage my business. We were still in COVID. And so that added a layer of stress to all of this and also my future plans because I wasn't sure if Airbnbs were going to be an option in the long term. They ended up to be, and I found this beautiful blend. I do Airbnbs for short-term rentals. I also do longer rentals. I'm about to head to Montana for the summer through a different app or website that's actually for traveling nurses. And I have found that they are just much more favorable towards professional traveling employees like me, a true digital nomad. And so I'm trying that one out this summer, but I've also done, stops at hotels along the way. Love my IHG loyalty that I'm building up with them and have started to do some house sitting and some pet sitting here and there because I really am homeless and there isn't anywhere that I'm required to be at any given time, unless of course I've made plans. I do have a quite ridiculous spreadsheet. I am very type A. I'm a Virgo. And so this whole lifestyle is very out of character for me if you think about it. But my spreadsheet, it's a Google sheet and it's shareable. I've sent it to my parents and my brother. And so if anybody questioned, haven't heard from Meg in a day or two, check the spreadsheet. It's likely that you'll find me there, but it is the way that I track longer term plans so that I don't double book myself. And now that the world is back open again, theoretically, and I'm doing a lot more in-person client work, I've got to now coordinate my personal travel with my professional travel. And that has put me into a tizzy more than once, to be frank. And so now what I'm learning, the more I've been doing this and sort of leaning into this as a lifestyle, I do believe for the foreseeable future, this is how my life will look. I thought this was going to be 6 months or a year and the world would open up and tell me, you need to move to insert city name here. And I still don't know what that is. I've loved everywhere I've been for different reasons, but none of them are beckoning to me and saying, come and put down roots here. So with that in mind, I continue to travel and am thinking longer term stays in each place I go probably makes more sense. I need a routine mentally and physically. I need a better workout schedule. I do better when I prepare my meals and there's just reasons why we have routines. We thrive in routine. I just don't know that I want a permanent place anytime soon.
Interesting. And I remember when you were coming through Chicago, you weren't too far from me. We met for lunch and, you're doing all this by car, right? I mean, you
Yes.
don't fly. You're driving everywhere all over the United States, right?
Yes. And it's funny because the question I get most often is, do you have an RV? And the answer to that is no, I do not have an RV because of plumbing.
Do you have a van?
I don't. I have an SUV, like a small hybrid SUV situation. And it's perfect. It's perfect for a couple of reasons. More space, more stuff. Mm-hmm. So the fact that I have limited cargo room and I travel in canvas bags. All my stuff is in different those reusable shopping bags. And so there's one for the kitchen and one for the bathroom and one for shoes and one for my entertainment bag, which is the book I'm reading at the time and some little arts and crafts stuff because I like to do those sorts of things when I'm out and about. And they all fit kind of Tetris style in the trunk of my car. What I don't do is leave things out in the back seat or the front seat that would be visible and would make the car, more attractive to a break-in, which happens. It's a real thing for digital nomads that when all of your worldly possessions are with you in your vehicle, you worry about things like that. So, and you mentioned, Maggie, earlier, my safety, and I take that really seriously. And so I have pretty tight boundaries around when I travel, I only drive during daylight hours. I only drive for 6 hours at a time. So if it takes me longer to get somewhere, I just know, I need to be alert. I need to be present when I'm driving, and I burn out. We all do. And so I don't do the 12-hour. I can get there in one day and save a few bucks. To me, it's worth it. It's worth it to take my time. And also I'm working full time while I'm doing this. So for example, I've got plans to be in Montana in about a week, 10 days. And it's going to take a good long while to get there because I've got to stop for the daytime to get work done, to take calls and be present on Zoom and do things like that. So it's just the logistics are challenging, but they're just different. They're different than I've done before. I really enjoy the planning and the research. So going on to Airbnb and these different sites and researching neighborhoods and leaning into my personal network. Where should I go? What are the best places? People who live there know these things. And so all in all, I have sincerely never had a bad experience, period. What I've had are just amazing. I've met amazing people, and our country's amazing. Somebody the other day posted on social media one of those checklists of all the states that you've ever been in. And I realized, I think I've got Alaska left.
Nice.
And that's it. But most of them I've covered, like half of them I've only been to in the last 2.5 years. So in the last 2.5 years, physically, my mind and my world has expanded in a huge way. So there's a lot of layers to this.
And so since this is, women and money, the shit we don't talk about, what's the financials like kind of living as a digital nomad? I mean, you pay for a lot of, Airbnbs or hotels, but you're also not paying rent or electricity. You pay more for gas, and you need your car to always be in tip-top shape. But, you also have to probably buy smaller increments of food. It's not like you can do a Costco run and keep it all in your car either. It'd save money that way. So what do the financials kind of look like in that sense?
It's such a good question. And I love that you're asking, because I think we should talk about it, and I'm happy to talk about it. So when I first started this, I looked at my all-in housing expenses in Chicago. Chicago's not an inexpensive place to live, though I lived affordably. So I added up my mortgage. I lived in a condo, so the monthly assessments to the association, an average amount for maintenance, my utilities, my insurance, my property taxes, all of that, added all of that up. And that became my monthly housing budget because I knew I could afford it. It was manageable then. And so as long as I stayed within that number as I traveled, then it was going to work out in the end. And it has. And there was only one time I went over my budget, and that was in Denver 2 winters ago. I wanted to be in a very specific neighborhood because I had some friends there and I wanted to be walkable to them. And so I kind of blew the budget that month. But on the flip side, house sitting and pet sitting is a barter exchange. And so I don't pay anything to be there, nor do they pay me for staying there. And so months like that, and I don't do that on a monthly basis, it's more like a week or two here and there, but those certainly balance maybe a month when I've gone over my budget. I also don't go to extravagant locations in the high season. So as much as I'd love to be in San Diego in February, you won't find me there. This February, I was in Michigan, and housing in Michigan in the winter is much more affordable than it is in the summertime on the shore of Lake Michigan. So I'm definitely very budget conscious. I would say the net after 2 years is I've spent far less on housing than I would have if I had stayed put, which I wasn't sure how that was going to go, but looking at the numbers, that's been true. I definitely pay more for gas. It was brutal when gas prices were really surging out west, and I was paying $6 and $7 a gallon to fill up, and I had to drive from California back to Chicago. And it was just every time I'd go to the pump, it was like, "What are you doing, Meg? This is not okay." And and I've put a ton of miles on my car. I did change vehicles shortly after I hit the road. So the summer of 2021, I got caught up in the trade-in. We want to buy used cars game. And I ended up trading up, which for a newer car with fewer miles, which I think was a good decision. I'm not a car person. And so for me, having safe, reliable transportation has been, I don't worry about it. And I think I would have had I stayed with an older model. So you're definitely right. Food costs are much lower because I love Trader Joe's, and I can go to Trader Joe's and fill up my little red basket. And now it's a little bit more, but about $50 for the week. And I cook. So I make meals that last for days and days. And my friends know this about me. I'm not food focused. And so I don't really care what food goes in my body as long as it's giving me sustenance and is nutritious.
And vegan, right?
And vegan. Yes. So I make some pretty interesting concoctions with my beans and veggies, and I'm perfectly content with that. I save the going out for socializing. So if I'm back in Chicago and I'm meeting girlfriends, and then I'll be more inclined to go out for dinner. But in general, I make most of my meals at home, wherever home happens to be at the time. And then I'm trying to think of, another maybe important thing to talk about is my clothing situation. And this might be interesting to someone who's even not thinking about the nomad thing. But about a year ago, I made the decision to work with a personal stylist, which has a very pretentious air to it. It's not. I've told my stylist a million times she needs to raise her prices for the value that she's providing me, but she has helped me to build a capsule wardrobe. And so I have about maybe 20 pieces of clothing that cover 2 seasons at a time. So fall and winter, or spring and summer. And from the 20 pieces, I mix and match and make outfits. And she's also helped me on a more personal side to really see my body differently. And I'm in my mid-40s now. Things are changing, and I want to embrace the change and not resent the change. And having an outside perspective really helped me to see my body and my shape differently, and then dress for it has been a really empowering experience that I did not see coming. And so I really enjoy that process. And overall, I probably spend about maybe $2,000 for those 2 seasons at a time. So it's kind of like a revolving. Right now I have spring and summer with me in the car, and fall and winter are back at my parents' in their basement, and I'll pick them up, or my mom will mail me a box when I'm ready to switch them out again. So what that's eliminated is I don't shop. I mean, I'm a classic go to Target for a tube of toothpaste, and $50 later or $100 later come out with stuff, and I love Target, don't get me wrong. And I still have to buy things, but my rule now is it has to be something that I will use up. So I will on occasion buy bubble bath, or I'll buy a candle, or I'll buy something, but it has to be something that will not leave a physical trace, if that makes sense. So just a different way of living, and a different way of looking at things. And yeah, so I think I covered most of the basics.
Let's dive into your business.
Okay, let's talk about it.
Because when we talk about planning, so how did you plan your wardrobe? How did you plan your meals? How did you plan your finances? How did you plan how much you can take in, or what's got to go out, right? Because you only have limited space. You plan for your automobile. How do you plan to run as an entrepreneur? Like, running your own business isn't hard enough. How do you run your business this way? Let's share a little bit about that.
Yeah. So first things first, what the last 5 years has taught me, or I have taught myself, I should say, in the last 5 years, and this experience in traveling and living and working at the same time, has really helped me to see that my definition of success has very much changed since I was a young woman in the working world, where it was a focus on making more money year over year, getting the next promotion. I think I was working my way up to the C-suite, but I don't really even know. I don't know that I had a plan. I just knew that whatever I was doing, I needed to do more and earn more. That was the MO at the time. And this has taught me that what I have is enough, and where I am is enough, and that I am complete, and my life is complete just as it is today. And so resetting that dollar amount, that goal that I had for myself, from being more to being enough, right? Enough to cover my living expenses, to save for the future, and to give charitably, because that's important to me. But once I had accomplished those things, I didn't need to keep pushing and grinding to make more. And that's been a huge shift for me. And I still struggle with it. Sometimes I have girlfriends climbing the corporate ranks, and And now at the season of life, acquiring the second homes and sending the kids off to college, and they're living very different lives than I have chosen to live. And 99% of the time, I'm very content with where I am, but I would be lying if I didn't say every once in a while, I wonder, have I made the biggest mistake, and how will we ever know? Right. So starting with kind of redefining what success is, then I backed into it. And really, I do this in my day to day. I ask myself questions like, is this work I'll be proud of? Is this work that's in alignment with my values? Can I make enough money to accomplish what I'm trying to accomplish in my personal life by saying yes to this project? And these are not questions. This was not a test I was running any sort of job situation through before, because I didn't think I could. And the more I've leaned into running my business like a CEO and setting and protecting my boundaries, the more, it sounds so woo-woo when I say this, but the more the business has responded with the kind of clients I want to work with, the kind of opportunities that put me in my sweet spot for the most amount of time and compensate me fairly and adequately. And so I wanted to create a business that supported my life, not the other way around. I saw all of my friends burning out. I burnt out. I didn't know that you could do it any other way, frankly. And so I was really testing, is that the only way, or is there another way? Now, candidly, I don't have goals to be a 7-figure business. I'm not scaling this to sell it to private equity. I'm not trying to build something to pass on to the next generation or to bring on a team of 100 people. I'm really building a business that supports me, and that's it. And so it's a very different business model than maybe we see out there, especially on social media, because we all like to present our biggest and our best. And I'm very much what you see is what you get. And what I have found in my business is leaning into that has brought the right clients to the door, because nobody feels like they're getting anything other than me. And when I tell them I have another spreadsheet, go figure. I have spreadsheets for everything, but it's my forecast for this year and next. And physically, where am I going to be at any given time? And then also financially, where am I for the month? Have I hit my goal? If I've hit my goal, then I get to start saying no to things, or it's easier to say no to things. Let's put it that way. One of the big things, and I've not said this on a podcast before, but I'm really thinking about going overseas next summer for the summer.
You are.
Yeah.
Yeah, you are.
But that opens up a whole new question of, you run a business that is largely in person. Can you squeeze all your in person in the months outside of that trip, and then just be virtual for the months that I would be in Europe? And the answer to that is, it's not going to happen if I don't plan for it. Right. So the goal right now is to block that time to be unavailable for in-person things. And that's something that is happening over time. When you're first starting out, you say yes to everything and you feel grateful. And of course I still am, but that anybody is calling you or DMing you or reaching out. And so you take projects or agreements or arrangements that are far below what you'd like to be making, but you take them because it feels good to be busy, and maybe it'll lead to something bigger, and you're very much proving yourself. And one of the things that has really resonated with me, that was shared with me, is that just because I'm 5 years in, or at the time was 6 months or a year in, it doesn't negate all the experience that I had that got me there. And so I was diminishing myself left and right, and undercharging and undervaluing all over myself, and really owning the position that I'm in and the experience that brought me here, and the risk, the huge, ginormous risk that I took to do this and to build a business where I can speak my voice and my truth and be 100. The listeners can't see this, but in my t-shirt on this beautiful day, having this conversation with you, none of this would have happened if I hadn't first said, I think I want to do it a little bit differently. And so the business is all sorts of projects that feed my soul, as like millennial as I can be. I'm an old millennial and a young Gen Xer. So like I straddle this line every day in the decisions that I make, but I get to a couple of things I'm working on right now. I'm building women's conferences for the insurance industry, and I get to tap my network of amazing women to come and speak and present and be part of these events, and doing group sales coaching for experienced and new salespeople in the insurance industry. I'm doing some writing. I've got a bi-monthly column for an insurance publication, which I'm really proud of. And they've given me total liberty to talk about the things that I want to talk about. And I'm like, I just wrote a column on boundaries, which I talk about these all the time. I can't believe the day has arrived that I get to talk about these things in an industry journal, and helping organizations define their core values and then implement their core values. Like just all this squishy stuff that I didn't think when I was a young woman starting out in the insurance industry that they would ever tolerate, let alone pay me enough that I could support myself living the life that I want to. So it's a really cool moment in time. Thank you again for giving me a chance to reflect on this, because I'm usually so in it that I just don't often do this.
Well, and what I love about what you do is you're educating the insurance industry about all these different pieces and parts that they were missing, right? So often. And by bringing your wisdom to the table, sharing what your gifts are and what your expertise is, you're helping remold what the industry really, 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 really needs. It's going to take a lot of work. We still know there's a lot of work ahead of us, but yeah, I mean, and you're a pioneer in that area.
I don't know about that. I struggle with some of the labels, but I will say, even in the 5 years that I've been doing this, we've come a long way. I remember 5 years ago, nobody knew who I was. I started my coaching. That was the first thing I was doing. And I can't tell you how many people diminished what I was doing and labeled it life coaching. And what's funny is that is a lot of what I do, because what happens when you create safe spaces for people to talk about what's really going on is it's rarely, I wish I was selling more insurance. It's usually something else. And so my degree's in sociology. I had grand plans to get a master's and go into the counseling field. That didn't materialize, but I feel like all these years later, I've really come full circle. And a lot of what I get to do, everything I get to do day in and day out, is helping the people that are already here connect differently with their work and with themselves and the relationships they have. And that is like, what? I can't believe I get to do this. And I'm grateful to the industry that they're ready, that we have to view the relationship between work and life differently. We just have to. So that we're here and regularly I'm getting the requests that I'm getting to come in and present or speak or engage in this way is telling me that we're headed in the right direction.
Awesome.
And I feel like you really practice what you preach. And so, seeing you live your life, you're like, oh, well, I want someone who practices what they preach, teach me. So I think that's a huge step.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
thank you.
Before we sign off here, is there any advice, you would give any listeners after experience your life, any advice you would give?
Oh, advice is such a loaded thing for me, because I don't always think it comes from the best place. So I'll just say this. At times when I have been in periods of doubt or transition or uncertainty, leaning into a sense of curiosity, just a sense of curiosity, whether it's journaling or jotting things down or going for a walk or locking yourself in a dark room for 30 minutes, whatever that looks like for you, there's a reason that you're feeling a pull or a call to explore that thing. And instead of diminishing it and telling yourself all the reasons why you can't explore that thing, just let yourself go for a minute, because that's where it starts. This was not, my little girl dreams did not include any of this, literally none of it. And yet here I am. And, what I would have told her is make no plans, right? Make plans, be responsible, but also be open to the twists and turns and squeezing as much out of life as you can while you're living it.
Awesome. And I have a question for you. What are 3 major creature comfort things you always have to have with you as you travel?
Oh, that's a good one. I make a smoothie for breakfast every morning. And so I travel with my NutriBullet. No joke. I had houseplants when I was a homeowner and love my houseplants. And the listeners won't be able to see it, but there's a little houseplant on the desk behind me here, and I travel with that plant. So I acquired it in Kentucky 2 years ago. I found out that a girlfriend of mine had passed away, and I was just feeling a lot. I was blue and I was down in the dumps and I was missing her. And I went to a local flower shop and I said, "Do you have any plants?" And they gave me a little clipping. And I went to Goodwill and I bought the little glass container that it's in. And I don't tell the Department of Wildlife, but I stole some dirt from a forest in Kentucky when I went on my walk, and I planted it, and it's traveled with me since. And so not really a creature comfort, and the last thing I would say are I travel with it's a quilt that my mom made for me back in my corporate days. It was always cold in the office, which we all know why. It was cold in the office. And so she made this just a little lap quilt for me to keep by my desk on the days that I was cold. And so that's with me all the time too. And it comes with me on my pit stops because I'm always cold and I like to be under a blanket. And Airbnbs aren't notorious for washing such things in between guests. Yeah. And so this way I know it's mine, and it's my germs that are all over it. So
love it. Love it.
Yeah. You kind of caught me off guard with that one. I'm like, what else would there be? I also travel with knives, not for protection, but because I like a good sharp chef's knife. So yeah.
Especially if you're cooking all those vegetables.
I know, right? Did you see any of those coming?
No, we didn't. And so before we sign off, will you tell the listeners the name of your podcast and what that one's about, where they can check it out?
Yes, I'd love to. The name of the podcast is Bound and Determined, which if you're listening and you're in the insurance industry is a bit of an insurance reference, but it features the stories of women working in and adjacent to the insurance industry. And I would frame it as the stuff that we typically would leave at the door. So we talk about personal things and professional things and everything in between.
And is that on all streaming platforms?
It is. It is on all streaming platforms. If you want to jump right to it, you can head over to my website, which is adjunctadvisors.com/bound. You can find all the episodes there, even back to season 1, Dr. Barb, when you were my guest, which is such a fun moment in time.
Yeah. All those links will be in the show notes. But thank you so much, Meg, for coming on today and sharing your story. I feel like it's super inspirational of just how you can really go live your best life. You just got to follow your heart. So I appreciate you coming on and sharing your knowledge, your story, your expertise. And thank you everyone for listening today. So, give us a follow, share it with a girlfriend, and be financially fearless.
Information is for illustrative purposes only and does not constitute tax, investment, or legal advice. Always consult with a qualified investment, legal, or tax professional before taking any action.
The Institute for Divorce Financial Analysts, IDFA, is a proud sponsor of Purse Strings. IDFA is the premier organization dedicated to the certification, education, and promotion of the use of financial professionals in the divorce arena. IDFA provides specialized training to accounting, financial, and legal professionals in the field of pre-divorce financial planning. To find out more about earning the Certified Divorce Financial Analyst designation, visit institutedfa.com.